attackers have gotten very smart. They realize that they have to go after the backups in addition to the primary environments, because if a organization can recover, then they're not going to pay the ransom. And the reality is that the vast majority of ransomware events are attackers just trying to make money.
Welcome to Screaming in the Cloud. I'm Corey Quinn, and this promoted guest episode is brought to us by our friends at Rubrik. They also bring to us their Chief Product Officer. Anneka Gupta has been there for about 4 years now, and, well, first, thank you for deigning to put up with my slings, arrows, and other implements of misfortune.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about something I've talked about before. S3 is not a backup. I know. You're versioning, you're replicating to another region, you even have lifecycle policies. Congratulations, you've now built an expensive way to lose data slightly slower. Here's the thing. When ransomware compromises your credentials, and it will, it can delete every version in every region because it's all using the same access controls. That's where Rubrik comes in. They actually air gap your backups from your AWS credentials, make them immutable, and can tell you which snapshots are clean when you need to recover. That's a backup. Learn more at rubrik.com/SITC.
So let's start at the very beginning here. What does Rubrik do, followed up with, and what does a chief product officer at such a place do?
Absolutely. So Rubrik is a security and AI operations company. We help organizations recover their data when they've been hit with cyber attacks, such as ransomware. And we help them build cyber resilience into their infrastructure and strategies. We're also doing a lot around helping organizations operationalize AI. As a chief product officer, my day is quite varied, but my role fundamentally is about enabling our product strategy and product roadmap and really thinking about what is it that we can solve better for our customers and how do we continue to innovate in this highly evolving landscape at the intersection of data security and AI.
So I'm going to back up a little bit here and date myself somewhat. I'm an old crusty sysadmin from once upon a time, and I've always tended to view the idea of cyber resilience as being a fancy upmarket term for make sure that you take backups. We start talking about AI, it's but we've had tape robots since the last century. I get the sense that events may have outpaced me in this particular part of the world. It feels like it goes beyond backups today.
That's a great question and a great perspective. I think that we end up talking to a lot of people that share this perspective too. If you think about the technology of backup and recovery and the way that the use cases have evolved, really, originally, it was really around natural disasters and natural disasters that were going to hit your data center or operational issues that, again, end up hitting your data center. But what we've seen is, first of all, as the data landscape has evolved, as organizations both have data that are still in their data center, data that's in the cloud, data that's in SaaS app, now the surface area is so much broader and the challenges are so much broader as well. Then on top of that, what we've seen is that there's been an evolution where it's not just now about operational failures or natural disasters. It's actually, a lot of the time, organizations are having to recover from cyber attacks. And when you're actually executing a cyber recovery, it's actually quite different than operational recovery, because in a cyber event, it's not just about, hey, recover everything to the most recent point. In a cyber event, you have to answer critical questions like, what was the blast radius? How do I find a clean point of recovery so I don't reintroduce malware into my production systems? How do I quarantine the malware? How do I know if sensitive data was impacted? All of these questions you have to answer before you actually do a recovery. And the challenge is that to answer those questions, without a technology like Rubrik, it often takes weeks, months in order to actually be able to find that clean point of recovery and to answer all these questions and to get back up and running. And what we have seen firsthand is with our customers is that they've been able to really shorten that cyber recovery time by about 100x. And that has allowed them to be more confident that in a cyber event, they can actually minimize the overall downtime of their business, which is hugely impactful because in a cyber event, it's not just the ransom that you may have to pay. It's actually the cost of downtime for your business, which can massively outsize compared to like what a ransom might be.
How challenging has it been to productize this? Because I think back at the places that I've worked as a grumpy sysadmin, which we then call, DevOps or platform engineering or SRE, which is the same thing. They just pay better. Great. The problem that I found was that planning for backups and restores, because no one cares about backups, they care very much about restores, but getting back to a point of viability was a highly bespoke process in every case due to architectural limitations, implementation decisions that have been made in years past, and of course the specifics of a given business model.
Absolutely. So the way that Rubrik architected our systems from day one was really figuring out how we could build a unified platform that could create a single way to manage and operate your backup and recovery across on-prem cloud and SaaS. And so we have built things that makes it super operationally easy, way easier to deploy, where you don't need as much hardware on-prem. And in the cloud, we have cloud native ways of deploying our technology. And so it becomes a lot easier to operationalize across this whole ecosystem. And the reality is that the way to do recoveries well and fast across these different surface areas is really different. And the limitations and technical challenges are very different. Also, when we think about how do you actually like scan for malware and find clean points of recovery and know what was impacted.
Well, how you really do it or how you tell the auditors you do it? Ideally, those should be congruent.
They should be congruent. Yeah, but it's really hard. Like, as you said, previous to customers using Rubrik, often what our customers have to do is rehydrate the data, then run some kind of scanning on that data, and that can take a really long time. Instead, the way that Rubrik is architected is that we have a single data and metadata layer where we actually can scan the backups and in real time provide insights into here's where we found malware. And we can do that both like every time we're taking snapshots as well as going back through the historic data. So the ability to scan in place really enables organizations to just do all of that upfront work without having to like set up whole separate infrastructure and take valuable time in setting that up and then actually running the scans.
I've always found that when you start setting these things out, people care about them very much right after they really should have made it a point to care about it a smidgen more than they did already. Like, no one is as zealous about backups as someone who's lost data. Guilty. How do you get people to care about this before it becomes a barn door horse situation?
I think people are already making that shift. Like what we have seen with our customers is that, since like 2019, 2020, 2021, as ransomware became a bigger and bigger challenge and organizations were really facing it, boards were asking the management teams, hey, what's your plan for ransomware? And as there was more publicized examples of massive attacks on healthcare companies, on Colonial Pipeline, on casinos, on, all of these very, very publicized attacks, now it is very top of mind. I think also what we're seeing is in highly regulated industries, there's a lot more regulation coming out saying that, hey, you have to have a cyber resilience and cyber recovery strategy. It is unfortunately the case that people often invest still too late, but I do think that psyche is changing around it. And I think where we're going in the future is saying, hey, you actually should not just have this as an insurance policy, but you actually need to be doing cyber recovery simulations and cyber recovery testing on an ongoing and frequent basis, because you don't want to find out when you're in the middle of a cyber event that, hey, you actually didn't have the right technology or strategy or people or process in place to actually do those recoveries.
When you keep referring to it as cyber, I hear this is much more of a security angle than my historical experience with, and they are aligned on a common axis. Whether it's because there's an attacker that wound up deleting data, or I once again did one of my hilarious database stunts that I'm sure we'll laugh about someday when the bleeding stops, I found that you care about a lot of these same things. Are you looking at this more as a security story? Is it more of an operations story? Or is this a distinction without difference?
I think it's kind kind of a distinction without a difference in that anything that we're building for cyber is also going to serve well in an operational recovery where a developer dropped a database table, or where there was some kind of server outage in your data center, or where you had some kind of deletion or encryption event in your cloud environments. Like all of the technology is the same to support both. I think in the cyber scenario, you just have these additional questions around the blast radius, finding a clean point in recovery that are very different than what you would have in other cases where you might have to execute a recovery.
So a question that I have to ask, that might be slightly impolite, but that's sort of my brand, and I tend to go with it, is that if I take a look at how folks care about things in business, there are two real categories. There's the proactive idea that this could triple our market share. It could quintuple our revenue, summon the board. Great. And then you have the reactive side of things. Security being one example, backups being another, AWS cost, high, buying fire insurance for the building, all things that should definitely be done and cared about, but you can throw effectively infinite money at these things as a white elephant until you have no money left, and it doesn't get you any closer to the business milestone that you're targeting at. How do you go to market in a story like that?
I think if you look at security specifically, the spend going towards security is skyrocketing. But most of that spend is going towards prevention technology. And the challenge with that is that people are investing more and more in cyber prevention, and yet there are more and more cyber attacks. There's a real challenge there if you're really focused around prevention. What we focus on is assume breach. Assume that you have already been breached. Assume that an attacker is either already in your system or is going to get there. What are you going to do about that? And how do you actually recover and respond to that? And so that is a separate area where traditionally there's been a pretty big underinvestment there. And so our message is, hey, you should be like, you have to assume breach. I mean, because of the prevalence of cyber attacks. And if you just keep investing in prevention, you're never going to actually make your business resilient. And then you're going to be susceptible to the inevitable moment where an attacker breaks through your four walls and is able to breach your environment.
You folks have been on the record as saying that, I forget the exact number, but some horrifying percentage of security incidents, backups have been compromised. I believe it was a majority of the time.
Yes, for certain providers, you can actually go out on the internet and see how ransomware groups are specifically compromising the backups. Rubrik has been architected day one from a security-first mindset. And so we have a multitude of controls around the backups themselves that prevent the backups from getting compromised during an attack.
Now, cynical question that I have to ask, is that entirely because the backups were explicitly targeted, or is part of this because they've been compromised for 2 years, things have naturally gone organically into the backups before someone finally noticed that they had a problem? It's one of those see no evil approaches to security approach. As best we can tell, we've never been breached is sort of a statement of proud ignorance.
It's a great question. So what I will say is that when malware lands in a primary environment, it can get copied into the backups, right? So that's a potential point of compromise. But what I will say is, like, usually that malware is not going to be activated on the backups. It will just be in the primary environment. And we have capabilities that help you find malware specifically in the backups when it lands or shortly thereafter if it's a new malware that was detected. Attackers have gotten very smart. They realize that they have to go after the backups in addition to the primary environments, because if a organization can recover, then they're not going to pay the ransom. And the reality is that the vast majority of ransomware events are attackers just trying to make money. It's not these like massive nation state actors. Those are obviously there too, but it's a lot of cyber attackers for hire or people that are just trying to extract money out of organizations as quickly as possible. In order to do that, they have to try to compromise the backups as well. And for legacy solutions where they were not built with a security first mindset, where they're taking backups over open protocols, where the data is not immutable on the first copy, like all of these things that are just not very secure, that leaves the backups themselves susceptible and the attackers will go after them.
Roughly 5 years ago, I put out a blog post titled Multi-Cloud is a Worst Practice. And despite my opinion on that, which has evolved somewhat, but not entirely, the world has clearly gone multi-cloud, either by strategy or by accident. Sometimes it's for great reasons, sometimes it's for terrible ones, but it leads to massive expense in terms of infrastructure sprawl, in terms of just the cost of complexity that ties into this. What are you seeing? Because that has to have security and resilience impact.
Absolutely. And I think not only are our organizations multi-cloud, and often it is by accident, right? It's a organization acquired another company that happened to use a different cloud provider than their main cloud provider, or two different departments within the same company decided to use different cloud providers for different reasons, and that didn't get caught and reconciled together. There's a lot of reasons why people end up in this multi-cloud state. They're not only in a multi-cloud state, but they're in a hybrid cloud state. So they still have important data that's sitting on premise, as well as data that's in the cloud. Now, the challenge with all of this is that if you're managing a cyber resilience strategy with 5 different tools, one for your cloud environment, one for your SaaS apps, one for AWS, one for Azure, one for GCP, one for OCI. If you're using different tools for all of this, then first of all, the operational complexity is really high. And second, actually making sure that you have a strong cyber resilience strategy across all of these when they may not be uniform and have uniform capabilities is very challenging. So what we see is that often organizations with this kind of complexity, one way they can manage the risk is by having a unified platform that helps them with cyber resilience across all these apps so that they have a single construct and way of managing cyber resilience and managing whether they are actually in compliance with their own policies, being able to manage that in a central way.
It's always strange to me seeing environments from a costing perspective where, oh, yes, we're spending a large amount on backup because it's worth it. You dive into it a little bit and you ask leading questions, and it turns out that they're backing up a fleet of web servers that have thousands of them, and they're spending at great expense imaging each one of these things, when the entire web server fleet is created in about 200 lines of CloudFormation. It's, maybe there's a better way to do this. This gets worse in the multi-cloud story. I mean, for a while back, I found that one of the more cost-effective things companies could do is turn off all of AWS's first-party security services and just suffer the breach because it costs less money when all is said and done. With multi-cloud, that is no longer tenable. People are forced to go in a direction of third-party providers that frankly, have a better user experience, so thanks for that, but also starts letting them reason around this in a sensible way. So I guess my question for you is multi-cloud actively serving to make security worse? Like, are we just giving people bigger attack surfaces while patting ourselves on the back for avoiding lock-in, even though we didn't?
Quick word from Rubrik, who wants to have an awkward conversation about your backups. You know, those snapshots you're taking, the ones in the same cloud account as your production data, those aren't backups. Those are just more data in the same place. When ransomware shows up, and it inevitably will, it's going to encrypt your production data and your backups because they're protected by the same credentials. Rubrik actually air gaps your backups and makes them immutable, which means attackers can't delete them even if they compromise your accounts. It works across all major clouds and Oracle Cloud, and actually helps you recover when Murphy's Law gets creative. Check out Rubrik.com/SITC.
Anytime you're talking about the surface area expansion of data and applications, that is increasing the risk to your organization. It's increasing the number of entry points that an attacker has. It's increasing the amount of surface area that your security teams have to monitor. So there is inevitably a risk associated with it. You know, I think most of the organizations that I talk to that have multi-cloud environments, it is not because they explicitly chose it for a vendor lock-in reason. It's usually because they evolved into that through acquisition, through not having a centralized IT team or infrastructure strategy and ending up in that state. There are some that are trying to play the clouds against each other and get a better deal. But I think it's becoming more and more common knowledge that first of all, you're increasing your operational complexity and you're increasing your security risk area. So I think that's a challenging position to take. And also, like, you usually, the more that you commit to a given cloud, the more you can get discounts based on that commit. So if you're spreading that commit across multiple clouds, then you're just not going to get the best deal. So I think that's a big piece. cost is super important for our customers. And we, when we deploy our technology in the cloud, we are cost optimizing the storage of backups massively compared to the native solutions that the cloud providers provide, because that is one of the benefits in addition to cyber resilience that we need to provide. Otherwise, it becomes, as you said, cost prohibitive to actually provide these services.
I should point out that as we're recording this, we are in the day after AWS's big meltdown for availability that lasted half a day. And I really hope that by the time this publishes, people don't come back and have to ask which one. So we're going to be optimistic on that. But there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions of, we're going to start going multi-cloud for everything. We're going to start spreading things out so that we aren't subject to this. But so many of these stories are not, this is how we eliminate a single point of failure. It's here's how we add a second single point of failure at tremendous expense and then act surprised later if we actually do this. But these conversations happen every time that there's a significant notable cloud outage. But people generally don't do that once the panic has subsided. And people have the strategy they have for a reason. And those reasons are no less valid today than they were a week ago.
I agree with that. And I think that there's multiple types of risk factors that companies are inevitably thinking about. They're thinking about, okay, like what happens if my tenant gets compromised or my account gets compromised by a cyber attacker? They're thinking about what happens if the cloud goes down in this region or zone. They're thinking about what if the cloud totally goes down and I have to fail over to a secondary cloud. Like there are a range of different scenarios that companies are worried about. And we see this and we talk to them all the time. And I think there's as with any risk, you have to ask yourself, like, what's the expected outcome of this risk actually manifesting? How costly is this to your organization? And is this risk worth managing? One of the things that we found to be quite successful for organizations is using our technology to be able to keep a copy of their applications and be able to do a recovery cross-region. So thereby you aren't reliant on a single region in the cloud, and a multi-region outage is much less likely than a single region outage. And so there are coping mechanisms. I think truly doing cross-cloud recovery, backup and recovery is quite challenging for a cost perspective, operational perspective. There's so many aspects of that make it not super realistic today. Now,
I do see companies doing a rehydrate the business level of backups to another provider, not necessarily because there's a tremendous risk of AWS suffering its first ever global network outage. They've never had an issue that hit every region. They've had control plane issues, but it's easier for some of these companies to do this than explain to their auditor every period why they didn't do it. It checks a box. That feels like it is much less tied to the specifics of a risk and more of a decision that they make.
There are a lot of check the box capabilities that people want to be able to offer. And we think about those and offer solutions, different kinds of solutions for those check the box features. And then there's stuff where that needs to be operationalized really well, because it is something that you will likely rely upon in a real event, like cross-region application recovery and being able to orchestrate a full application recovery across the different resources and data that make up your application, as opposed to doing it on a service-by-service basis. So there's a lot of things that are like real challenges that you want more than a checkbox for. And then there's some stuff that's understandably you need a checkbox for the auditors, and that's kind of the way it goes.
It's always difficult to test these things because you can simulate a full region outage of your cloud provider of choice whenever you want, but there are other companies involved in the critical path of getting you in front of customers, and you can't test their ability to survive that with their critical path vendors and so on and so forth. And it ends up being a giant thorny knot because everyone cross depends on everyone else. So we see these challenges of how do people come back up when everyone is codependent on one another already working. And that's where some of the fun firefighting engineering tends to come into play. How do you think about that?
There's always going to be externalities and things that you haven't tested and that you're going to have to deal with in real time. That is just the nature of doing business. You cannot map out every single dependency between all of your technologies for all of your applications. So I think one is figuring out what is your minimum viable business? Like, what are the applications that are absolutely critical to servicing your business that you cannot live without? So then you shrink kind of your surface area. You're really thinking about those applications. And then test what you can test. Like go and test the pieces that you're able to test, and that way you get the reps in on the things that you can control and the things that you can see and the dependencies that you do know about. And that way, when let's say you're able to test and manage 80% of those things, then when you're hit with a real cyber event, you can spend all your brain power on the 20% that is unexpected. Because in an event, there's always going to be unexpected issues that emerge. Some of them may be technology, some of them may be people and process. Like, oh, you don't have the phone number for this vendor that you thought you had the phone number for, right? It's simple.
Or you do, but it turns out they have one or two other customers that might be in the phone tree ahead of you.
Yeah, exactly. So there are many things that you can control, but I think if you have the ability to actually test recoveries for things that are incredible, like for the applications that are really incredibly valuable to you, and you're able to cover 50 to 80% of that whole process, that just sets you up even better for when you actually have to face a cyber event.
What do you think people are mostly getting wrong right now when you take a look at the broad sweep of how they're thinking about cyber resilience?
I think specifically in the cloud, there are a couple of patterns that I see. One pattern is people thinking that because the cloud is redundant, that means that they are actually protected in a cyber event. But the reality is that if the data is corrupted, redundancy only means that is going to get replicated throughout.
Replication is not a backup. You learn this at your peril. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So I think that's one thing that's not super well understood all the time is that that's not a cyber recovery strategy. That's a failover if your infrastructure is down, but your data is fine. The second thing that I would also mention is that every cloud company has their own native backup solution that essentially is taking cloud snapshots of the environment. There are a lot of challenges with these solutions.
That is putting it very charitably. Yes.
And I think a lot of people are like, well, I have a solution because I have native backup. And the reality is that there are a lot of gaps in native backup, even from like an immutability, recoverability, granular recovery. And then when you talk about all of the cyber capabilities of being able to detect malware, find a clean point of recovery, detect the blast radius, all of that, then the tools are really lacking. And so that is the cyber resilience plus the actual like granular capabilities, immutability, and on top of that, the cost that some of the native backup solutions add to your storage bill is quite high. So with our solution, like we optimize all of those pieces, and we're not just limited to a single cloud. So in your inevitable sprawl of multi-cloud, because of the way your business has evolved, now you have one solution that can cover all of that.
It's worth pointing out as well that it's easy to become overly negative when looking at a lot of the first-party offerings. I mean, I've stared too long into that abyss, and it has gazed deeply and thoroughly into me, which probably explains a lot. But these are hard problems, and it's very tricky to start building things that are holistic solutions for folks. We've been talking about cloud, but there's an awful lot of hybrid out there. It turns out that building data centers wasn't knowledge lost to the ancients, and now only 3 specific companies can do it. Lots of companies have on-prem facilities and are in a variety of different hybrid approaches. What's your story for those folks?
That's like our ideal customer, honestly. We have so many organizations that we support that have a piece of their applications on-prem, some of their applications in the cloud, some applications that span on-prem and cloud and have different components. And being able to have a single solution and platform to be able to provide cyber resilience across all of these applications and have the same paradigms, have different ways of actually taking the backups and doing the recovery themselves based on the tools that are available in each of these environments. It's really important. And that's why a lot of our customers come to us, because they want that solution that's going to span across. And they also want the flexibility of saying, hey, maybe in 3 years, I'm going to move even more of my application to the cloud. Will you be there with me on my journey, or am I going to have to start from scratch? They don't want to have to start from scratch.
I will also point out that you have a variety of approaches that make sense for a modern cloud infrastructure. I've worked with so many quote unquote legacy vendors, which, a condescending engineering term for it makes money, where you go in and they're, so what are your instances for your database? Like it's DynamoDB. What do you mean instance? Like what's that? Can you just pull a disk image from it? And then we close the page and look at something more reasonable for us. But as a closing thought, and I understand that this might be controversial for Well, most companies, but I'm going to roll with it anyway. When it comes to cyber resilience, it's one of those things that absolutely positively has to work. When people are dealing with Rubrik, they're already having a pretty bad day on some level. Why is this a great spot for AI?
Oh, that's a great question. AI.
I try to keep it as not insulting as I possibly could, and I feel I may not have succeeded for
I
it.
don't know. I don't think that that's an insulting question. AI is a double-edged sword, right? There are wondrous capabilities that AI is going to give us, and there's things that we're investing in from our improving our solutions, leveraging AI. And then AI is also a risk, right? That has to be managed. And so when we think about AI, I was telling you earlier about the journey of people having to recover from natural disasters and then cyber events. They're going to have to recover from AI making mistakes as well. So this is just going to be another vector of risk that's going to necessitate having really great capabilities around recovery. Now, I think AI is obviously still in its infancy, and there's a lot of challenges that organizations are facing as they think about the adoption of AI and how they can truly get value from it. Because I think, if you talk to survey organizations, most organizations say AI is a top priority, but most projects are stuck in prototype. They're not getting to production.
It is certainly not the top of the spend curve in the common case.
Correct. And I think, but there's a big challenge around how do you provide monitoring for AI agents, governance for AI agents, and remediation when AI agents make mistakes. So that's something that we're thinking about in the context of our platform and where we can offer it. And we're also looking at, in this complex sprawl of data and infrastructure and applications, what are the ways that we can use AI to help organizations monitor their infrastructure better and make recommendations of how they what are their most critical applications? How can they be protecting these applications better? I think there's a lot of use cases like that we can troubleshooting failures in backup and recovery. All these use cases are things that we're also looking at. Well, can we use AI to make it better, to make it simpler, to make it easier to operate our technology and provide cyber resilience to large enterprises?
Yeah, and I think that is a reasonable take on this. There's a lot of challenge that I have with folks that are tripping all over themselves to take what they already are doing and already going to market with. And then, nope, it's AI and has been forever. But it does change some things. Not everything. I don't think that it's clearly not valueless, but I also don't think we're going to properly summon God through JSON. I think the truth probably is somewhere between those two. And we're still figuring out as a society what that looks like. Technology advances. And taking an approach of optimism, but with a sense of caution to it, seems reasonable.
Yeah, I think so. I think with any technology, there's great advantages that come with it, but you have to figure out how to leverage it. And at the end of the day, it has to be solving a real problem. And I think we're still in the time with AI where we're trying to figure out how to make it, how to take this technology and leverage it to solve really interesting problems. And that hasn't been totally figured out yet, especially for the large enterprise context.
I think you're right. We're going to see where this plays out. I'm very curious to see how it goes. But fortunately, if it winds up not doing what we had hoped and ends up being an entire boondoggle and disaster, well, at least we'll have some resiliency around our data.
I sure hope so.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you want to learn more, where's the best place for them to find you?
If you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn. You can look up my name. I work at Rubrik, Chief Product Officer. If you want to look up Rubrik, go to Rubrik.com, and you can also find us on all social media platforms.
Yes, and I believe the New York Stock Exchange, or are you NASDAQ? I can never remember who's on which exchange.
NYSE, RBRK.
Apologies. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's certain people care very much, and for the rest of us, it just gets lost in the details. Anneka Gupta, Chief Product Officer at Rubrik. I'm cloud economist Corey Quinn, and this is Screaming in the Cloud. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Whereas if you've hated this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice, along with an angry, insulting comment that we're just going to scatter to the winds because we will not be taking care of that data.